Now, where do people discover thought leaders? There isn't a website where you can go and find thought leaders. LinkedIn is obviously one of the most popular choices, but it's difficult to find a thought leader because often those people that say they are thought leaders because they say they are, not because they're actually creating content in any form. So it's difficult to actually see who is a thought leader and who is not. And often people don't call themselves thought leaders in any case. They just happen to be people who have earned the attention of a following, of an audience around them in their niche speciality. One of the important factors in discovery of thought leaders is search. So people don't necessarily type in thought leaders on Google. They may be searching out a subject, and from that subject, they may find you. And that's a very natural thought leadership discovery journey, is that somebody is looking for an expert in a field, and they will go to Google and they will bump into you through Google, through something that you've done. So an important part of thought leadership is SEO, search engine optimization. Now, you don't have to hire an SEO consultant for this. Obviously, SEO consultants do great work and they can help you rise through the rankings. But one of the great aspects of podcast guesting is that the podcast hosts have already done that for you by creating a podcast. If you have a look at Google search results, what you're finding is, particularly on Google, they have this podcast stripe, this carousel that appears on the page one. And it's actually a lot easier to rank in that space than it is on a similar keyword in a blog post or an article. Here we have on the screen, and if you're listening along on the audio version of this mini-series, then go and check out the video as well on podcastguesting.pro. What I'm showing you is search results for data science. Now, data science is an extremely competitive space, and therefore, if you wanted to rank on a keyword for data science, you would have had to produce an authoritative article many years ago, and you'll be competing with the likes of maybe Harvard Business Review and, of course, Wikipedia, which you will not outrank in terms of Google page rank. So it's an impossible task, but you could, for example, go on to page one through the podcast stripe, and Google maintains this podcast stripe. It was connected to Google Podcasts, which is a bit of a sleeper really in terms of SEO potential. But really, if you're on Google Podcasts, and you should really target podcasts that have this kind of SEO as well, is you're going to get good rankings. Neil Patel, the SEO guru, says that to rank for a keyword on a podcast, it's 1,100 times easier than ranking for the same keyword in an article. So think about that. If I'm looking for an expert, I don't necessarily go to Spotify and Apple for the answer. If you look at the data that shows where do people discover podcasts, yeah, a lot of people do discover podcasts on Spotify and Apple, but people don't search out necessarily podcasts for thought leaders. They search for experts in their field, and then they see the podcast that these experts are talking on. And when I see and hear you talking on a podcast, it gives me great social proof. For you to be on a podcast, it's validation of sorts. It means that, well, he must have been kind of interesting because the host wouldn't have accepted it. And he must have said something, otherwise the host wouldn't have published it. Now that creates more social proof than simply saying that you're a thought leader on your LinkedIn profile. And the great part about SEO for thought leaders is it's endless. You can discover a podcast that was published 10 years ago. And there are podcasts published 10 or more years ago that are still on Google. Think about that versus the fire hose of social media, which is you posting on LinkedIn or you posting on Instagram, TikTok, etc., Twitter. That attention span will last seconds, literally. So either I've got you now or I've lost you forever. Yet if I'm searching out data science and I see the podcast that you did in 2012, it's there talking to people. You are talking to people for 10 years or more all over the world. Think about the power of that as a funnel for you as an awareness tool to build top of funnel. What you have to do now is that when you do your podcast is you give all those listeners a chance to then connect with you. And this is what I talk about in the episode about the thought leadership funnel, how to structure that. Because if I then go to your podcast that you guested on 10 years ago and you mention where I can go and get more information, go to your website, sign up to your newsletter, then you are generating leads if you then flip that idea for the next 10 years. Because in 10 years' time, I will discover this podcast that you do today, and it will still be generating leads for you. Now, that's where it compounds. And anybody that knows personal finance, wealth generation, knows that the key to wealth generation is compounding. You can never get rich through simply A, having an income, or B, simple interest. You've got to compound. You've got to grow, because then you can layer income streams on top of each other. And you can do this through podcasting as well. You can layer passive income, if you like, passive marketing streams on top of each other. So if you were to do 20 podcast episodes and each episode pointed back in some way to your newsletter, think about the power of that in the next 10 years. Because you could do 24 episodes in the next 6 months, which is 48 episodes in a year. And over 10 years, that's nearly 500. So there's 500 conversations happening out there that people can discover you, and each of them talking and bringing people to you. Think about that as your own marketing department. So today we talked about the power of SEO for thought leaders, and think about that Google has already built an audience for you. Just tap into it.